Why, hello there! Today I want to talk about teaching noisy classes, and as some of you may know, I already made a video about teaching quiet classes, which I definitely considered to be the most intimidating classes when I first arrived in Japan. However, noisy classes definitely do have their downsides as well. So noisy classes, while they are immediately charming, can also really ride that line between noisy and completely out of control. So I think that there are a lot of tricks to keeping the noisy classes fun because these students are really, really fun when they have a good class, but they can be really overwhelming if they're having a bad class. And there's definitely lots of ways that I've learned over the past 3 years to make sure that as many classes as possible are the fun type rather than the overwhelming type. So let's get into it. The first thing I make sure to do with noisy classes is to always have some extra work ready to go. So say for your average class, you have one worksheet ready to go and maybe like a 5-minute game at the end of the class. A noisy class really needs to be kept on task all the time. So often I give them a little less time than other classes to do the worksheet because you can't really leave these classes to their own devices for very long without it getting incredibly loud and out of control. And once you've lost the attention of these students, it's really hard to get it back. So the way that I deal with this is that I make sure that I'm giving them just enough time to finish their work and not really very much more than that. It sounds a little mean, I guess, but honestly, having some of them complete their work and some of them not complete their work is much better than having everyone just roaming around the classroom going wild. So give them a little bit less time, and because of this, you'll want to make sure that you have an extra activity or extra game ready to go up your sleeve. There will be classes where you don't need this, but it's always, always, always worth having it. You will never regret bringing it, and you might often regret not bringing it. So you might be surprised at how quickly time goes by in these classes. Often I will finish my planned out lesson that has worked in a 50-minute class for other classes, and I'll look at the clock with a noisy class and it'll be like 35 minutes have gone past, so I have an extra 15 minutes to fill. Reusable games are what I recommend for this, and there are many, many, many games that you can try. I love bingo, I really love class Pictionary or class charades, and noisy classes are fantastic at games like this as well, like they really love them. Bingo especially is one of my favorites for the really out of control classes. So yeah, just make sure that you have something up your sleeve ready to go for when they've finished the work. You don't want to be giving them too much time for each activity just because, yeah, once they're gone, they're gone. Number 2 is be careful with group work. Now, as a general rule, I try to just stick to solo and pair work in noisy classes and eliminate group work entirely because it can just get out of control so fast. However, if you have a lesson plan where you really can't avoid using groups, I do have some things that you can try. So first off, never let noisy students choose their own groups. It's a recipe for disaster. Handpick their groups for them. You can ask the JTE for help with this, or once you get to know the students better, it will be quite easy to put them in kind of balanced groups where you have a couple of studious students, a couple of like louder students, that kind of thing. The second thing is appoint a leader for each group so that someone is accountable for keeping the noise level under control and keeping their group on task. This is a really good way to do things. Once again, when you get to know the students, it'll be a lot easier for you to assign someone who's going to be a good leader. Until then, you can ask your JTE for help if they are cooperative, and if not, another really great way to do it is have the students elect a leader. Usually they'll end up electing someone that they're happy to listen to, or sometimes just the loudest person, which works out well because you want to be giving those noisier kids more responsibility so that they're feeling more involved and not having the time or energy to get involved in other shenanigans. So yeah, avoid group work where you can, and if you can't, try to mitigate any extra noise factors. Number 3, and that is to make use of their competitive and active nature. So what makes a lot of these students noisier is that they're very individualistic and they can be super Genki, super energetic. These are wonderful traits to have, and if you can harness them and use them for good instead of evil, you can have really fun classes. So I have a couple of examples for this. For my first example, let's talk about Classroom Pictionary. So in Classroom Pictionary with the quieter classes, I will have just one student come up to the board and take a word from me and then draw the word on the board. And then when someone raises their hand and gets the word right, I will have that person choose the next person who's going to draw. Now, this is good for quiet classes because no one is going to raise their hand if they think they have to be the next person to come up to the front of the class. However, noisy classes are almost the exact opposite. So with a noisy class, I will split the class in half down the middle. So you have team 1 and team 2. And I will have one student from each side come up to the board, and then I will give them a word, and they can either draw on their side of the board or they can gesture out the word. Adding this active component seems really successful. They really enjoy it. They find it hilarious. So the first team to guess the word correctly gets a point. Adding this competitive element and this like team-based spirit really seems to help them focus on the game more, because a lot of the time some of the noisier students tend to be quite serious about Pictionary and competing, and so if anyone else is talking or not paying attention, they'll be like, shut up, shut up. So yeah, it's a really good modification, and you can do modifications like this on almost any game just to make it a little bit more active and a little bit more competitive for them. The second thing that I have is speeches. So this is more of a lesson plan than a game or activity, but I wanted to show the ways that you can modify just basic lesson plans to be more friendly for these types of classes. So I have a speech lesson plan where each student will come up to the front and make a speech that they prepared earlier. And as you may guess, this doesn't go over great with noisy classes because everyone will just shout and talk while people are making speeches. Not good. So I split the class into quarters for this, or actually into however many rows you have of desks. So like row 1 will be team 1, and then team 2, team 3, that kind of thing. You get it. And then I say that each successful speech made by that team is 5 points, and anytime anyone interrupts another person's speech by talking, that is -2 points. And once again, this is just a way of making them self-police. So the students who really want to win this game, and there will be more than you might think, will tell the other students in their team to stop talking. It's just a really nice way to take that pressure off you, because honestly, once they're gone, once they're talking, shouting over them and telling them to listen really is not very effective. So you want to make sure that you have the students policing each other wherever you can. So modifications like this are fantastic, and as I said, they can be made for a ton of different games and lesson plans. Just bear in mind that these students' strengths are going to be that they are energetic and that they are individualistic, and they also tend to be quite a lot more competitive than the quieter students, or at least more vocally competitive, so make use of that where you can. On to number 4. This one is keep explanations and instructions brief and easy to understand. So in quiet classes, you often have the opportunity to really explain something properly and as in-depth as you would want to. And I think that's great. That's one of my favorite things about quiet classes, is that you can really get those explanations right so that they can all understand what's happening. However, in noisy classes, if you try to speak for this long, a lot of them will lose focus. And as I've said many times before in this video, once they've lost focus, you've pretty much lost them for the rest of the lesson. So a few ways around this. Obviously, keep your instructions shorter. Make sure that you have something prepared beforehand so that you know exactly what you're going to say, the words that you're going to use, how you can get across as many of these points in as short a time and as few words as possible. Examples are really fantastic, so make sure that you have an example prepared, and also make sure that you write it on the board so that even if they weren't listening during the first time, or if they didn't understand during the first time, they can always refer back to the example on the board. But yeah, it's super important to make sure that you aren't losing their interest or losing their focus before the activity's even begun. And it's so easy to lose their interest by just nattering on and on about the rules. So just be aware of that. And number 5, my final point, which is make sure that the loudest kids in the class aren't taking up all the attention. So although it is a loud class, of course there are going to be some quieter and shyer students in there, and it's so easy for them to get lost in the background of classes like this. So when you're walking around the class during your short activity times, just make sure that you're really giving them the praise and positive reinforcement that they deserve as well. It can be all too easy to just use all your attention and time on the louder students because they can be so charismatic, so funny, and also it's easier if you're paying attention to them to keep them a little bit quieter, right? But when you have a chance, just make sure that you're taking note of the quieter students, and especially if they raise their hand to answer a question, try to prioritize these students, because noisier students will raise their hand for like every other question, if not just every question, even if they don't know the answer. So you'll always have a chance to praise them and let them get a right answer. But if someone who doesn't usually raise their hand does, make sure that you're prioritizing them getting some praise and some positive reinforcement for that. Just remember that even though it's a noisy class, not every student is going to be noisy. That's about it for teaching noisy classes. I really hope that if you're a new ALT and you're getting a little bit overwhelmed by this type of class, that this video helped you a little bit. If you have any other questions, of course, please leave them in the comments down below. I will do my best to answer them. And apart from that, I will talk to you later. Bye.